become a key issue ahead of national elections next month. The opposition Conservatives are widely tipped to win that election, and their leader, Friedrich Merz, who you just saw there, are tipped to win that election. He's expected to use his response to the Chancellor's speech today to propose sweeping changes to the country's migration and asylum policies. And he's already announced that he's going to rely on support from the far-right AfD to get his plans through Parliament, breaking a long-established convention that no party works with or relies on their support. Now, this follows a deadly knife attack by an asylum seeker in the southern city of Aschaffenburg a week ago, in which 3 people were killed. We'll bring you Chancellor Scholz's speech and Friedrich Merz's response live here on DW. First, let's join our chief political editor, Michaela Kufner, who's at the Parliament. Welcome, Michaela. So what can we expect from the Chancellor today?
Well, we can expect a very heated debate. We just had a minute's silence for the 2 victims of that attack by a rejected asylum seeker from Afghanistan in the city of Aschaffenburg. There was a 2-year-old child amongst those 2 victims and a 41-year-old man. And the President of Parliament, Bärbel Bas, who's from Chancellor Scholz's Social Democrat Party, she called for an honest, frank, but a fair debate here in Parliament. It almost sounds like she's announcing a fight, and it indeed is a kind of high noon moment between the sitting Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Friedrich Merz, the man from the conservative CDU-CSU party, formerly known as Angela Merkel's party, who is actually tipped to win in these upcoming elections in February. They're talking about migration, this contentious issue, and you already alluded to it. Here, the conservative bloc is for the first time accepting the fact that they might achieve a majority through votes from the far-right Alternative for Germany party. But this is on 2 motions. We're not talking legislation here. There will be legislation brought into Parliament that would also tighten migration law. That's coming up on Friday. Today, essentially, the conservative CDU-CSU is tabling a motion here that includes a 5-point plan that would include a rejection of migrants at the German border. And that is something the Social Democrats, Olaf Scholz's party, reject, saying this was flirting with the idea of cooperation with the far right. And that is something the Conservatives continue to protest. And that's where we stand. And we expect a rather stern exchange here because, after all, we're in the middle of an election campaign. OK, so migration, the big issue. And just so I understand it, we're expecting a motion from the Conservatives which they expect will pass if the AfD supports it. And so what is it about what they are proposing that seems so extreme that only the AfD will back them? In fact, hold that thought, because the Chancellor has actually taken the podium, so we'll come back to that.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, nach dem, was wir heute von Roman Schwarzmann gehört haben,
after the words of Roman Schwarzmann, it's not easy to proceed to our agenda. We bow down before him and all the victims of the Holocaust. Roman Schwarzmann's words echo with us. Compassion and justice may never be empty words. That's what he just told us. And I say compassion and justice are commitments of a democratic constitution. Compassion and justice find their expression in our fundamental rights, amongst them the right to asylum, the protection against violence, war and terror. If today we discuss the consequences of the cruel attack in Aschaffenburg, then let me say the right to asylum is a permanent component of our legal system. We must not question this. The right to asylum is the immediate response to the cruelty of Nazi terror. It was German and European Jews back then who were rejected at foreign borders. And that's a lesson of history telling us it must never again happen. Germany must never again let this happen. So if today, 80 years after Auschwitz was liberated, we're debating asylum, flight and migration, and as we are debating all the difficulties related to it, then the commitment to the right to asylum for all those politically persecuted must be part of this. Because it's a question of decency to make a clear distinction between those who can rely on the right to asylum and those who can't. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened in Aschaffenburg is a monstrous, terrible crime. 2 people were brutally murdered, a 2-year-old boy and a man who courageously confronted the attacker. Who will stab a 2-year-old child? Such a crime goes far beyond what is impossible to imagine. You can barely imagine the parents suffering. I often think of the victims and their families and friends. We mourn with them. We mourn with the people of Aschaffenburg. In Aschaffenburg and in many other places in the country, next to the great degree of compassion, we can also sense the uncertainty people feel. Mannheim, Solingen, Magdeburg, and now Aschaffenburg. Again, the perpetrator was somebody who abused our protection. Again, it was someone who shouldn't even have been here, who shouldn't have been outside of a prison. Again, we need to wonder whether the authorities failed. I understand all those who say, I've had enough. And I too say, I've had enough. I too am indignated. I am indignated. I'm repelled when authorities don't do everything they could to prevent the situation. So I do say there is a deficit in execution because all the 4 crimes, the one in Mannheim, the one in Solingen, the one in Magdeburg, and the one in Aschaffenburg, could have been prevented with the laws we enacted and which we even tightened. That is why it is just a question of decency. That's why it's just right if next to the government also Baden-Württemberg, Saxony-Anhalt have announced that they will improve. And it is confusing and irritating to see how the Bavarian authorities want to avoid and evade their responsibilities by finger-pointing at others and by avoiding to ask what went wrong in Bavaria, because things have gone wrong in the Free State of Bavaria. And yes, also the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, the BAMF, could have been quicker in reacting. I talked to the president of BAMF the very day it happened. It's not acceptable. To execute on foreigners' rights, to carry out deportation, to protect those who are mentally ill. All that is a task of the federal states of Germany. That's what our constitution says. And I've had enough of all those who finger point at others in order to not have the attention focused on what they did wrong. So the government can look at more deportation and a tightened up asylum law. We have tightened up asylum law and we will keep on doing so, but I expect the law to be consistently applied everywhere. We made our asylum procedures more seamless so that our authorities can react more swiftly. We have made sure asylum applicants can be allocated more swiftly. In many points, border controls at all internal borders were executed by us, other than the CDU government before us did. So we have stopped so many people at the borders through that. Longer times of imprisonment before deportation is now something that we've enabled. And these possibilities need to be fully used and exploited in all the federal states of Germany. Yes, and we do need more places for imprisonment before deportation. Also, Dublin Center to deport those asylum seekers that other European member states are responsible for. We need them in more places, not just in Hamburg, and we need to be able to enact our deportation laws, because only then will we find acceptance for legal immigration if we consequently apply the law. And we have increased deportations by 25% vis-à-vis last year, and even by 77% vis-à-vis 4 years ago. We're the only country that was even able to deport criminals to Afghanistan. It is difficult to do this with a Taliban government in place, but we managed to do it anyway. So the next deportation flight is already under preparation. We will also look into the situation in Syria on the ground, and once we can, we will also deport perpetrators and criminals to Syria, according to what the law stipulates. And we will talk about all this with the heads of government of the respective countries, just the very way we also pass our resolutions here. I am ready to act on any new proposal which further facilitates our authorities' work. But let me say it again, Mannheim, Solingen, Magdeburg and Aschaffenburg, the 4 crimes could have been prevented through the sheer application of existing legislation. All the 4 of them. So that's what we need to improve. On Monday, the interior ministers of Germany deliberated on that matter. I fully support the minister's decision to prevent crimes carried out by mentally ill perpetrators in a better way and to do better monitoring. And I salute the resolution to have a better exchange of data between all the authorities and also use biometric procedures in this. Dear colleagues, we've been very harsh in going to the limits with respect to some of our measures, coming very close to the limits of what the European agreements allow us to do, especially with regard to border controls that have to be renewed every 6 months. We will continue to do so. But one thing is also clear. We can't and must not go beyond existing legislation and valid laws. Preventing harm from the German people means to do anything we can do as a rule of law state, as the largest member state of the European Union. But what's a damage to Germany is just apparent solutions that will damage our constitution, that will damage our country. And they would even do harm to Germany's reputation in the world. That would undermine the foundation of the European Union. And this is what we need exactly in these times. We bear special responsibilities for that. But that's exactly what you're doing, Mr. Merz, if you say we are simply not applying European law anymore on our borders. That's the answer populists will love. That's a populist answer. The Catholic and the Protestant churches wrote a letter yesterday warning against the proposals you made, Mr. Merz. The Catholic and the Protestant churches yesterday warned against your proposals, Mr. Merz. Our courts will need to stop this illegal action. They would do so, and it would happen after a couple of days only. And you want to refer to a special emergency clause in the European contracts, even in the European treaties, even though you know that the European Court of Justice would never accept this. The largest country in the largest member state in the EU would openly violate European law, just like only Viktor Orban has dared to do so far. The largest EU member state would violate EU law, just like until now only Viktor Orban in Hungary has dared to do, with a fatal impact on other states. Something like that no German federal chancellor would ever have done. Not Konrad Adenauer, not Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt, not Helmut Kohl, nor Angela Merkel. No CDU federal chancellor would ever have done this. You all knew about the responsibility Germany had. Sorry, and they all knew that Germany was taking this responsibility. But an erosion of the rule of law state will destroy stability and destroy confidence. And all this happening in a time in which we are under attack by right-wing extremists anyway, being undermined by them. In such times, it's the moment for stability, not for more uncertainty. What would our companies, the hospitals, or the many commuters near the borders, what would they all say if the transport and free movement of people and vehicles was stopped? They are already complaining about what the controls mean to them. What would the Polish and French presidents say if Germany was announcing to break European law? The Austrian federal chancellor has already made it clear that he would take back some of the European legislation, so your measures would not even be working in practical terms. Dear colleagues, Germany's role in Europe needs to be a different one. This follows from a history. It is enshrined in our constitution, especially in these times in which Russia is threatening our peaceful order, where President Trump is embarking on a new political course. That's a time in which unity in Europe is more important than ever before. Especially with a view to migration policy, which so long has been separating us. After 8 years of stagnation, we were able to agree on a common asylum system in the European Union, finally. It will be applied everywhere from next year. The EU's outer borders will be better protected, and deportations and rejections will happen there. Refoulement will happen there. Once electronic control is in place, while countries which for years did not want to participate have now agreed to a solidarity mechanism in allocating refugees. And one thing that's so important for Germany, we can so much more easily deport asylum seekers to exactly the EU member state that's responsible to deal with them, because those member states will not be able to deny that responsibility anymore. And with that, we will be curing one of the most important initial errors made in the European asylum policy. So all these are commitments that we fought for years. commitments that we really had to fight for. And all that would be in danger, because if we opt out of European rules, then others will be opting out as well. That's why we have such an interest in the new rules being applied everywhere. Here at the Bundestag, even before the elections, we can pass the law that we will need to pass to embark on this major reform in Germany. So, if this European agreement happens, it will be in Germany's interest, but your illegal proposals endanger this. There are some limits that you may never, ever cross, some red lines you may never cross if you're a statesman. The oath a federal chancellor swears is that they will preserve and defend the constitution and the law. That is the benchmark of our constitution. So you're saying that with your proposals you've been going all in, just as if it was a poker game. But politics in this country is far from being a poker game. Cohesion in Europe. Cohesion in Europe can't be compared to gambling, and a German federal chancellor must not act like a gambler, because they'll be deciding about war or peace in the most extreme case. You said you didn't care who would be following your illegal proposal, but it's not a matter of indifference whether you will work with the extreme right-wing political camp. Not in Germany. Since the Federal Republic of Germany was founded more than 75 years ago, there was always this clear consensus of Democrats. Namely, in our parliaments, there will be no collaboration with right-wing extremists. It was you who broke this rule. And as a first step, you said you wouldn't even be negotiating with the Democratic Party. So the only partner left are those who never cared about the rule of law. That's the extreme right, and you know that. And you even seem to be wanting just that. You seem to be accepting the AfD support for your illegal proposals. The AfD who are fighting against our democracy, who hate Europe and who are intoxicating the climate here. That's an error that cannot be pardoned. Until now, we had only learned about your zigzag course from other fields of politics, like from external policy, like from the Taurus deadline or other political fields. But in a question so vitally important for Germany, especially the question whether, as a Democrat, you will be collaborating with the extreme right, I had really expected that you would keep your word. On the 12th of November, you said you didn't want to form a majority in parliament with the AfD. On the 13th of November, it was when you reinforced your words here at this rostrum, together with the SPD's parliamentary group chairman, you agreed to omit any measure that would mean you would need the AfD's votes. Just a short time ago, you gave your word on TV and you said the CDU would not sell their soul through a collaboration with the AfD. So you linked your political survival to this point, and many citizens were confiding in what you said. But what will your words be worth now? What will your words be worth now? We're currently seeing what's happening in Austria, where all the democratic parties before the elections clearly said they would definitely not join forces with the FPÖ party, especially Conservative Party. Absolutely promised this. And now, after the elections, now the Austrian Conservative Party all of a sudden are ready to vote for an extreme right-wing FPÖ Chancellor and support him. So for Germany, it is clear now. After the German elections, there must not be a majority for CDU, CSU and the AfD. After the elections, there must not be a majority for CDU and AfD, because a black and grey government coalition would be what's threatening us. So if you say, I don't care who votes for my proposals, we'll also say in the end, I do not care who votes for me. And then an overlap with regard to political collaboration between you and the AfD is not just there with the proposals on illegal migration and how to stop it, but the tax policy of the CDU and AfD proposals would take the burden of those who already have most. So the citizens of our country can make sure on the 23rd of February that there will be no majority for such a wrong politics in Germany. Our citizens can make sure that there will be no majority for black and blue in our country. Colleagues, from out of the democratic center, we will make sure there's going to be more order and more compassion in migration policy, just like we did it together with the federal states in the last years. Important proposals to strengthen inner security are already on the table, ready for their application at the Federal Council. I already named the law that will enable the reform of our migration system. We want to modernize the Police Act, which is also ready here to be passed at the Bundestag. We want to enable our police a better investigation option, and we can pass this together this week, and also tightening up the legislation that we decided after the Solingen attack are right here on the table. For example, giving our security authorities new rights, for example, in promoting more data exchange on the internet. I don't know why these laws are being blocked at the Federal Council. What are we waiting for? Dear colleagues, let me say one more thing before I close. The day after the Aschaffenburg attack, I was in Erfurt. And at the side of the citizens' event, a young man came to me and he said to me, Mr. Scholz, I'm from Afghanistan, just like the Aschaffenburg perpetrator, but I want to tell you and all Germans, we're not all like this. What happened there shakes me just like it shakes everyone here in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, almost a third of all people in Germany have a migration history, and many of them are scared of becoming suspect people or people that seem to be suspicious to others. But let's never forget a young boy from Morocco and a young girl from Syria were also amongst the victims of the attacks. And this is why we cannot allow for others to divide us and to separate us. We absolutely have to be consistent in applying the law vis-à-vis those who just abuse our country. And at the same time, we shouldn't give 1 inch of space to those who spread hate in our country. That's the right course to embark on.
It's German Chancellor Olaf Scholz addressing lawmakers in the German parliament. They're talking about migration reform. Seemed very personal. We're waiting now for the Conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, to take the podium and respond. While we do that, let's see if we can get a word with our chief political editor, Michaela Kufner, who's been listening. That's Mr. Merz there that you just saw, waiting to respond. Michaela, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
That seemed quite a fiery Olaf Scholz.
Yes, a big allegation is in the room because essentially Olaf Scholz is accusing Friedrich Merz, who's speaking next, of actually actively cooperating with the far-right Alternative for Germany in German parliament because he said he doesn't care who votes for these motions today. And you can expect him to protest that very claim very fiercely as well.
OK, he's just getting up and walking to the microphone now, so we'll have more from our chief political editor, Michaela Kufner, momentarily. First, we'll hear from the CDU leader, Friedrich Merz.
Madam Speaker, dear colleagues, honourable members, allow me a brief preliminary remark concerning the memorial event we celebrated this morning and a reminder of the speech given by Ronald Schwarzmann, which moved us all. I say this to one party and you, Mr. Gauland. That was the bit of dirt that you mentioned a few years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, 4 days before last Christmas, a man known to the authorities for many years, who comes from Saudi Arabia, has a rented car, races through the Christmas market in Magdeburg, and he kills 6 people, more than 300 end up partly seriously injured. Many of the injured are children, young adults, men, women, people of all ages. They will never again have a completely normal life without restrictions. And 1 week ago today, a small child from a group of children in a kindergarten and a man who happened to be there, wanted to help the children, were also stabbed to death by an Afghan known to the authorities. Another child and a man who tried to help them suffered serious injury caused by the attacker. Here in the German parliament, we expressed our sympathy to the victims, their families. I want to be very clear. If our compassion, our sympathy is really serious, if compassion and sympathy after such attacks isn't going to be just a political ritual, then at the very latest after Magdeburg and after Aschaffenburg, finally, effective decisions must be taken to limit the inflow of illegal migrants to Germany and against the illegal stay of people in Germany. We have a massive problem in Germany when it comes to crimes committed by non-Germans, particularly by asylum seekers. Referencing asylum seekers is particularly important to me, ladies and gentlemen, because we also have a great number of people of what we call an ethnic migrant background, many of whom live in Germany and have lived there for decades, the second, the third generation. These people are part of our country. There are people who are Germans, who live with us, who work with us, who have families here, and without whom our country simply would not be able to exist. These are people who have a right to not be mentioned in the same breath with the asylum seekers who commit crimes. These are people who, in part, advocate a much stricter asylum and migration policy because they probably see even more clearly just what the problems are in this country, because they themselves have become a target of hatred and violence. And this hatred and violence comes primarily from right-wing radical circles, and in the party AfD, they've even found a place in the German parliament. Chancellor, it's the third time in a short time that you have given us a declaration from the government regarding the latest attacks. As we know from you, you give us grand words about all the things you have done and the unresolved issues were simply seen as a deficit of the enforcement under the purview of the German Länder. The president of the Federal Office for Asylum and Migrants has publicly, not for the first time, but again today, said in front of the Home Affairs Committee of the German Parliament, and he said they are overburdened. It's an office which in your draft budget for the year 2024 has actually had 25% of its budget cut. Do you really think we have a deficit when it comes to enforcement and that all the other things you've done are right? And let me give you one other example. You have several times had meetings with the premiers of the different German Länder, and there were many, many proposals made, including the introduction of a nationwide pay card for asylum seekers. That still isn't part of the Asylum Seeker Benefit Act. Some of the federal states have introduced it themselves, including the Free State of Bavaria, who you so criticize. In Bavaria, the Green Party has been organizing the systematic misuse of this pay card by asking people to buy vouchers for goods and then exchange them for cash in the offices of the Green Party. That is the success of your policy with the premiers of the federal states. You complain that so far the federal states haven't agreed to the security package you proposed last year. Well, Chancellor, this security package was already slimmed down after it passed through the German parliament because you couldn't get your own government parties to agree on what the cabinet had decided. And now in the second chamber, you didn't even call on the arbitration committee because you were worried that an improved result from the arbitration committee would again not be approved by your government parties, in particular by the Social Democrats and the Green parties. Chancellor, it's too simple not to say it's a cheap argument to blame other authorities for a lack of enforcement instead of seeking where the problem is. And now you allege that I would make proposals which were illegal. This is a serious complaint, and I take that very seriously. Before I talk about this, there is one other sentence I would like to say. To complain that the legal situation happens to be the way it is, well, that is not the job of the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. You are not the supreme notary of the country. You are the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. If the laws are insufficient, then you have to make proposals to change them, instead of explaining that apparently nothing works with the laws we have. Our most important proposal, my most important proposal, is to finally have permanent border controls and to make it possible to reject people at the border. Ladies and gentlemen, the complete common European asylum and migration policy become dysfunctional. It really is dysfunctional. A proposal which is perfectly lawful according to general European law. And I ask you, what do they do in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Italy, the Netherlands, and many other countries in the European Union? What do they do differently to what I'm proposing now? In these countries, we find ourselves in the same European Union that we are. Now, talking about Article 72, about the Treaty on the Working of the European Union, TFEU, there are several former judges of the German Constitutional Court which are telling you that applying this relevant article isn't just possible, it's actually intended. And this article opens the possibility of prioritizing domestic law if public order is threatened. And I would like to say, what else should happen in Germany? How many people should get murdered? How many more people will become victims of these violent acts before you also think that here we're talking about a danger to public order? What else do you think should happen? Apart from this, I would like to remind you of German asylum law. So far, that only applies to less than 3% of asylum seekers. Let me remind you, in the year 1993, the German basic law, in agreement between the Social Democrats and my own party, was changed. And the amendment was Article 16a, paragraph 2 of the basic law, which now regulates very clearly that any persons coming from an EU member country or a country where the European Human Rights Convention applies are people who do not have the right to claim asylum under the German Asylum Act. And this applies to all those who come to Germany over land, because from every country there. So where do I violate the German basic right to asylum in my proposals? Ladies and gentlemen, let me comment very briefly to the draft bill we'll be proposing on Friday. It's actually been deliberated in the German parliament since September. It's not something which we just proposed overnight. It's a bill which was actually submitted to the German parliament after the Solingen attacks. With your then majority, on the day that your government broke up on 6 November 2024, you rejected that in the Home Affairs Committee. Now, let me tell you briefly what is written into that bill, which is going to be voted on Friday for the third reading. There are 3 points in that. One, to start putting the word limitation into the purpose of the Residence Act. Secondly, to end family reunion only for those who get subsidiary protection, in other words, for those who do not enjoy a permanent title to residence. And thirdly, more authority for the federal police so that they have all the necessary powers to act according to this law. Now, let me tell you what is against European laws, what is against the Constitution in that, and what stops you from accepting these 3 proposals and agreeing to them on Friday. What is stopping you? If you do not agree with these proposals, Social Democrats, Greens, FDP, if you do not agree to these proposals, then on Friday you will finally document the fact that you do not wish to change the influx of people into Germany. That is the result that we will get from you on Friday. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before I come to an end, let me make a few personal remarks. What I'm telling you now is something which in over 18 years that I've been a member of this parliament, and I've never said it from the rostrum like this, but I'm telling you today. At the very latest, after the appalling attack in Magdeburg and the lethal knife attack in Aschaffenburg, speaking personally and speaking as the chairperson of my political party in Parliament, I simply cannot, in good conscience, Thank you. Thank you for your heckling. You know, if the word conscience being mentioned causes this reaction from you, then you know what the word respect means to you in your parliamentary party or political party. I repeat it. I cannot, in good conscience, accept that allegedly formal agreements with you, with the SPD and the Green Party, after the breakup of your government, should now mean that here in the German Parliament we can only put decisions to the vote that you agreed to beforehand. No, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you that for a very good reason. We owe it to the people in our country, and in particular the victims of the acts of violence of recent months, to do everything possible to limit illegal migration and to detain those asylum seekers that are supposed to be deported and deport them. That is what we owe the people. And Chancellor, I regret the fact that all attempts to find a common solution with you, with your parliamentary party in the past 3 years have failed. So this week, for the first time in this parliament, it is up to you, only to you, the Social Democrats and the Greens, whether at the centre of the German Parliament we can still find a parliamentary majority for what I've proposed. It's up to you, ladies and gentlemen. And I think it should be very clear that we have no majority with the AfD in the German Parliament. We don't. Others would have to join. And yes, it could be that on Friday, for the first time, the AfD will provide the majority for a law that is necessary. The images we may see of AfD MPs who are jubilant will be unbearable, and the idea of that is already making me feel horrid. But, ladies and gentlemen, if I have a choice of either to continue looking on powerless while people in our country are threatened, injured and killed, with only the choice of continuing to leave it to the red-green majority in the German Parliament to be the only ones deciding on migration and asylum policy, or instead to do what as a factual solution is necessary. If we only have this choice, we decide for this latter option. And without doubt, ladies and gentlemen, democracy is in danger. Democracy is in danger when radicals gain power. That is why I will do everything to prevent just that. And the speculation, the allegations coming from you, Chancellor, I think you know me well enough, that is infamous and malicious. I will do all I can to prevent this, to prevent what you said from happening. And I would like to add one more sentence. I add one more sentence. Democracy is also in danger if a social and political minority, and you, SPD and Green Party, are an increasingly small social and political minority. And if this minority uses radical parties as a tool in order to continue on a lasting basis to ignore the will of the people. So, We will not allow you, the SPD, the Green Party, to tell us what we are supposed to do or not do. It's your choice on Friday. You can make your decision, and possibly the right factual decision will be made even without you. To be quite clear about that, a right decision isn't made wrong because the wrong people approve it. It still remains the right decision. And you, the Green and SPD parties, don't draw the wrong conclusions from that, even if you will try in a well-tested way, as you've already started, to attack me personally. Even oh yes, you're doing that. I can live with that. But even from the center of this government, one of your ministers actually called me a Nazi. First time I accepted his apology, the second time I won't anymore, because that is really something where any cooperation is no longer possible. That is very clear, and I have to make it very clear. I will not be moved by such attacks, and I will be resolute against all attempts you are making, and I agree with the great majority of the population, even with the majority of Social Democrat voters. Are you ever asking yourself why in the elections in 2025 in the rural area in northern Hesse, you have actually lost constituencies to the AfD? Are you ever asking yourself why that is so? Ladies and gentlemen of the Social Democrats, never mind what you do, I want to repeat once more. After the federal elections, I will do everything I can to make sure that never again, we will find ourselves in a situation which, to my great regret, we are discussing today in this Parliament. Thank you.
Well, that was ahead of the Conservative CDU party, Friedrich Merz, presenting his plans for sweeping changes to Germany's migration and asylum policies. He said he's going to press ahead with those changes if necessary, with the support of the Alternative for Germany party. Cooperation with the far-right AfD would mark a turning point in German politics. Well, migration has become a key issue ahead of national elections here in Germany on the 23rd of February, which it looks like Friedrich Merz is tipped to win. Now, this debate follows a deadly knife attack by an asylum seeker in the southern city of Aschaffenburg, in which 3 people were killed. So, Mr. Merz getting extended applause there. Before him, we heard from the Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It was interesting that Mr. Merz started his speech by distancing himself from the AfD, talking about Roman Schwarzman, who addressed the Parliament a little earlier today as the Parliament commemorated the end of the Holocaust. And he said Roman Schwarzman talked about what Alexander Gauland's party, the AfD, had described as a historical bit of dirt. Let's cross to our Chief Political Editor, Michaela Kufner, who's at the German Parliament and has been listening in. We'll start with what we just heard and then maybe go back to the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. We'll start with Friedrich Merz's response. There was a lot of... It was interesting to me that he started off by distancing himself from the AfD when he talked about Alexander Gauland's bit of dirt, and then again at the end, despite the fact that so many of the charges against him are that he's going to work with them against this German convention, Michaela.
Well, I guess the key sentence that he keeps repeating, and he did it here in the speech today, is that something that is right doesn't become wrong because it's getting the support from the wrong side. And the wrong side is the far-right Alternative for Germany party. He's somewhat jumping past this resolution that two resolutions we have in Parliament today, which really have no legal effect, pointing towards Friday and basically calling on the parties of the center, meaning what was formerly known as the coalition of Olaf Scholz, to vote in favor of a law that will tighten migration, but that is a far cry from the motion that we see in Parliament today. You mentioned Alexander Gauland. He's one of the co-founders of the Alternative for Germany. Well, he was actually in the audience today. He's very old. He isn't there very often. And he also became famous for saying the sentence, "We will chase them down. We will hunt them down." And them, that is the conservative CDU-CSU of back then, Angela Merkel, today Friedrich Merz, their Chancellor candidate in Parliament. And that is what the far-right Alternative for Germany is already celebrating, that they have the Conservatives at a point where they will accept votes from the AfD. That is something the Social Democrats, Olaf Scholz's camp alleges is cooperation, and the CDU-CSU Conservatives say, no, it's not, but we don't want to get to this point again. It is your inaction. So unsurprisingly, in an election campaign, each side blaming the other.
Okay, and the hostility centres on this proposal that is to be voted on Friday. Just talk us through what it is that the CDU are proposing that the Chancellor has been describing as being illegal.
Yes, essentially it includes more checks at Germany's borders, giving more powers to the police, something that is alleged to create more confusion than actually being able to facilitate the process. That proposal, that law would also include limiting migration, of once again becoming an aim of Germany's policies that was struck out by the previous government. So that is something that Friedrich Merz wants to see poured into law. What we don't know whether it will get a majority, but it doesn't really matter that much because it really is a motion today, is the full list of demands from the conservative CDU-CSU camp on migration. That would include rejecting people at the border, but that's a far cry from actually becoming a German policy, because in between that becoming a reality and now would be an election and also coalition talks, because we don't expect one party to come through. So that really is just stating an intention today.
Going back to the Chancellor's speech, the Chancellor spoke before Mr. Merz, Olaf Scholz. It was interesting listening to him. I too have had enough, he said. I've had enough of crimes that have been committed that could have been prevented with the current laws. I've had enough of those who point fingers at others instead of examining what they did wrong. So very much trying to put himself on the side of the people. It's not just you that's had enough, I've had enough and I'm in charge.
I think he was walking a very fine line there between being empathetic, also saying that none of the attacks we've seen, most recently, of course, that knife attack in Aschaffenburg by a rejected asylum claimant from Afghanistan, which also included the murder of a 2-year-old child, that would have not have been prevented by any of the measures that are now being either in this motion or in this law coming up, that it was solely a failure of the authorities. And there he was pointing at the federal, actually at the regional level, the state of Bavaria, but there are federal agencies also involved in this. So I'm not sure this is not going to backfire on him in the end. What is clear, and what we're also hearing from those authorities, is that there's a complete overload in terms of working through cases. And that could have, in this case, also led to someone who should no longer have been in Germany not having been sent back to his original country of entry. But very fast you get into the nitty-gritty details here. Essentially, Olaf Scholz is saying that without a need, Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor candidate from the Conservatives, is now allegedly cooperating with the AfD. He essentially said, I don't care who votes for this, it's the right policy. And if it's the far-right AfD voting for this, so be it. It's unclear whether they would actually provide the majority that is needed. That's still unclear at this very point in time. Part of the truth is also that previous laws, both from the Social Democrat-led and Conservative-led, have seen the AfD vote for them. The difference here is that potentially the AfD could make the difference. Ask yourself, is that really cooperating with the AfD, yes or no? That's really what was at the center of what was also an election campaign spectacle here in Parliament today.
OK, thanks for that, Michaela. DW's Chief Political Editor, Michaela Kufner, at the Bundestag. Well, as you heard, the German Parliament held a ceremony today commemorating the millions of victims of the Holocaust. 2 days after marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier said Germans must take the enemies of democracy seriously. He also appealed to Germans to not go back to a dark time. The president's remarks were followed by a personal speech by a Holocaust survivor. Well, let's get more on this from our political correspondent, Julia Saudelli. Remind us what we saw earlier this morning, Julia.
Yeah, so we saw a ceremony that lasted about 1 hour in the plenary chamber of the parliament with many people present, the full set of members of parliament, the president of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. And we also got to listen to a speech from him and from the president of the Bundestag, but also from a Holocaust survivor, Roman Schwarzmann, who was interned in a ghetto in what is currently Ukraine and was at the time in the 40s under German occupation. And what really stood out in this ceremony was actually his testimony, just because the testimonies of survivors are so strong in conveying